But now let's focus on natural language processing. Okay, let's get a little bit more technical. So the spoiler alert here is it's just bias in our natural language. Okay, it has nothing to do really with how we're training the algorithms. It just comes from the fact that we have biased language. The language that we use and that we record have biases within it. In fact, we count on that as machine learning engineers. We count on the fact that it's biased. What we want to avoid is unwanted bias. So it's going to be very high level here. What is natural language processing, NLP? We use it for a variety of things. Basically, what you do is you take natural language. It could be voice, it could be text, written text. You put it into some sort of black box or some sort of machine, and you get things out of it. You get information. And the kind of information you can get is you can search for documents that are similar to the document that you put in. You can translate between languages. Okay, this is something that clearly is extremely useful. Sentiment analysis, which is what I'll be focusing on later, where you want to know in a movie review, for instance, can you automatically detect whether this person hated the Hulk or they liked the Hulk or whatever movie you want to use. Can you do this? And this is not just a large field. This is also a lucrative field for businesses. You know, who's talking about us and what are they saying? Is it good or bad? Information extraction. This is probably where a lot of work at ACT comes in. I get information from students in the form of free text. I want to extract some information from that, and that will go feed into some models of how well they're doing in their various skills that I'm trying to assess. And there's question and answering. This has become a huge field now because it's expensive to have humans help other humans on the internet, and so you have a chat box do it. So can you answer typical questions and with high accuracy? And this is another sort of lucrative field and that's exploding right now. Okay, so one piece, the very first piece you have to figure out is words are not numbers, and we need numbers to have the computers do what they do. And so the first step really is to map the words into some form of number. Okay, we call this tokenization. So corpus is the group of text that you're going to be analyzing, or a very large group of text that you're going to be training on. And so what you want to do is take every word, or the most frequent words in that corpus, and map them to some numbers. So one way of doing it, of course, is to just have a very long vector or a very long array, where if this is Rome, so if I have a 1 here, that means that this is Rome. If I have a 1 here, then this is Paris. This is one-hot encoding, they call it. But you need a vector that's as large as the number of words in your corpus, okay? Which can be a problem if you're using, let's say, the entire World Wide Web or something like that, okay? So this is very inefficient. And the other thing that it doesn't capture is relationships between words. I know that cat and kitty are used in very similar places. They mean very similar things. And so, but if I look on this list, they may not appear anywhere near each other. In fact, the nearness on the list doesn't really mean anything anyway. So we would like to come up with some way in which we can represent words that capture some of this, okay? And that's where word embeddings come in, where essentially you map these words, each word, into a larger dimensional vector space, essentially. So imagine a big vector, and this represents cat, okay? So let's say it's 3-dimensional, right? So I have 3 different dimensions. And if I were to map the same vector for kitty, what I'd want is it to be very close in that vector space. So the nearness in vector space is going to imply that they have similar meaning, or they're used in similar contexts, which tend to be, so you can kind of equate those two often. And that things that are far away mean that they're unrelated. And this has been a very powerful idea. So essentially what you're doing, not only is that useful in terms of capturing information, it's also easier to compute, because instead of having a bunch of very long vectors, so what this is representing in color basically is what these things over here are, is that this is one word, this is very sparse, very high dimensional, I can have a lower dimensional thing, which actually captures these information. Yeah. So most natural language processing nowadays starts with mapping words into these higher dimensional vector spaces. And there's different ways of doing it. And this is starting to slowly creep into the tech part. I'll pull back out again in a minute. There's different ways of doing it for those of you who do machine learning. You have continuous bag of words, where essentially what you do is you have some word. I pick a word like kitty, and then I say, can I predict what that word is based on the words that are around it? Its environment. Because kitty and cat probably will show up in similar kinds of environments. And so if I can make that mapping, if I can predict it, then the representation which I used to make that prediction is what this embedding is. It captures that information that they're used in similar contexts. And you can use what is called a skipgram, which just reverses it. This turns out oftentimes to be a little bit easier computationally, where you have the word and then you predict words that would be nearby it. Okay, you're just reversing it. Give me the word cat, and I bet that I'm going to see the word pet or purr or something like that over here. And what you do is you just take lots and lots of data, and you basically produce these embeddings. So it's trained on a very large corpus of text in an unsupervised way. So unsupervised means you don't look in particular, you don't label anything. You don't say that I expect to see her near the word kitty. You just let the data do it. You just chunk up the data and let it do it in an unsupervised way. But it works really well. And what's nice is that relationships are captured also in these vectors. So for instance, there's a male-female relationship, which we're gonna get back to. You can already see problematic things happening. But, king, the arrow that goes from king to queen in this weird vector space is the same arrow. I could just move that arrow over. It's the same arrow that goes from man to woman. Okay, that makes sense. And that's encouraging that kind of mapping is held. Walking, the arrow that goes from walking to walked is the same as swimming to swam. Right? It's capturing our language. It's encoding how we use our language. And capitals of countries, those sorts of relationships are captured. So already we have this powerful tool to represent words that captures these meanings. And typically we do this, and then we do something else with the words afterwards, and it makes it a lot easier. However, some people have noticed that there are problems with this. And it's not problems with the method, but it's problems in our language that they're capturing. So for instance, man is the computer programmer as woman is the homemaker. This is the title of the paper. And the question mark, of course, right? So this is basically what they examined was word2vec. Word2vec is a particular type of embedding. And they used a corpus of Google News. Okay, this is news written by presumably educated reporters, right? And they use this as a corpus of text, and they learned these word embeddings. And what they found is that there are lots of stereotypes. Okay, he, she analogs. Sewing is the so if you take the vector that goes from she to he, and you attach that to sewing, it points you to carpentry. If you attach it to nurse, it points over to surgeon. Blonde, burly, so on and so forth. Hairdresser to barber, that one might make sense. Gender appropriate he, she analogs. So these are ones that would make sense. Queen is the king, waitress is the waiter, mother is the father, okay? So it gets it right, but it also encodes these built-in biases that we've been struggling with for a long time. And nowadays, it's really coming to the forefront that this is just not okay. Extreme she occupations, so there are certain occupations which have a extreme female context. You can see them here. Extreme he occupations, right? This is clearly 1950s stuff, okay? And this is from Google News, right? This is taken from recent. It's not like they're going back to the 1930s, 1940s, or 50s to get that. This is a language that is being used in the modern internet era, okay? Now, the interesting thing about this is that this shows up despite this idea of reporting bias. So reporting bias is the bias where things that are just obvious go unsaid. So what that means is things like male nurse actually shows up more often in our language than female nurse. You typically don't say, oh, the person working with me was a female nurse. You'd say it was a nurse, and if it happened to be a male, you'd say a male nurse. I mean, you wouldn't, but it does get said. So even though there's reporting bias, you see male nurse a lot more often. These algorithms were smart enough, this process was smart enough to figure out that what we really mean is that nurses are females and surgeons are males, okay? So it's amazing that that happened and scary at the same time. This is what's beautiful about this. You know, this is why I think this is actually really good. This is uncovering things that should be uncovered in our own language. This is not something that should be unsaid. We're digging things up, and this is a exorcism, so to speak.